If you thought Europe's brutal, record-breaking summer was finally winding down, that the worst of the heat was behind us, I have some news that the forecast models are screaming right now. Think again. Because after a brief cool down at the end of July that teased millions of people with the hope of relief, the atmosphere over, Europe is about to change in a big way. And it's not the change most people were hoping for. A powerful new dome of heat is building over the continent, what would be the fourth major heat wave of this relentless summer. And this time, it's taking aim at a different part of Europe than before. At the same time, a sharp split is developing across the continent, with some regions baking under dangerous heat while others turn cooler and stormier, and a real risk of violent thunderstorms erupting where those two air masses collide. So today, we're going to break down exactly what's coming for Europe's weather in the days and weeks ahead, where the heat is headed, who gets a break, where the storms could fire, and what it all means for the tens of millions of people living and vacationing across the continent. Now, a quick and honest note before we begin. This is a forecast, and forecasts always carry some uncertainty, especially as you look further ahead. So I'll be clear throughout about what the models are confident on and what's still up in the air. But the overall signal for this big pattern change is strong and consistent, so let's dig into it. But before we do me one quick favor, because it genuinely helps this channel. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. And if you're in Europe, tell me what the weather's been like where you are this summer, and whether you're bracing for more heat or hoping for storms and relief. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious how this brutal summer has been treating you. And if you want to stay ahead of Europe's wild weather instead of getting caught off guard, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means you'll always know what's coming. A thumbs up helps push this out to more people across the continent who need to see it. All right, let's get into it. First, let's set the scene, because you can't understand this change without understanding just how extreme this summer has already been. Europe has endured an exceptionally warm and dry summer. One heat wave after another, with this being the fourth major one. Across Western, Central, and Southeastern Europe, the relentless heat has driven a cascade of consequences. Severe wildfires scorching the landscape, rivers dropping to alarmingly low levels, and soil moisture being baked away, deepening drought across huge swaths of the continent. This has been a summer of accumulated stress on the land, the water supply, and the people. And that accumulated stress matters enormously for what's coming, as we'll see. It's worth pausing on just how consequential this summer's heat has already been across Europe, because it sets the stakes for what's ahead. Recent European summers have been genuinely deadly. Heat is a silent but massive killer on the continent, with tens of thousands of heat-related deaths estimated across Europe in the worst recent summers. Wildfires have torn through countries around the Mediterranean, destroying forests, homes and habitats, and choking cities with smoke. Rivers that are vital for drinking water, agriculture, shipping, and even cooling power plants have fallen to critically low levels. Farmland has been parched, threatening crops. So when a fourth heat wave builds on top of all of that, it doesn't land on a fresh, resilient landscape. It lands on a continent already worn down, dried out, and stressed by months of extreme heat. That's precisely why forecasters warn that even a moderate hot spell now could have an outsized impact. The cumulative toll means there's much less resilience left to absorb another blow. The land is primed to burn, the rivers are already low, and people are already fatigued from a long, punishing summer. This incoming heat dome is arriving at a moment of maximum vulnerability. Now, at the very end of July, parts of Europe did get a genuine cool down. Fresher air moved in, temperatures eased, and for a moment, it looked like summer might finally be loosening its grip and beginning to retreat. A lot of people breathed a sigh of relief. But here's the big change, the twist that the seasonal guidance and the forecast models are now pointing to clearly. That relief is temporary. The background pattern is expected to turn warmer again through August, with an increased probability of above-average temperatures across most of the continent. In other words, the cool down was a brief intermission, not the end of the show. The heat is coming back, and in a big way. The engine of this returning heat is a powerful ridge of high pressure, a heat dome, forecast to build and expand across Europe. When a strong ridge like this sets up, it acts like a lid clamped over the continent. Air sinks and compresses. Beneath it, warming up while clouds and rain are suppressed, allowing the sun to bake the surface day after day. Under this returning heat dome, forecasters are watching for temperatures to climb well above 40 degrees Celsius. That's over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, in the hardest hit areas, with some model guidance hinting at genuinely extreme, record-challenging heat in the atmosphere. This is shaping up to be a serious and potentially dangerous hot spell. To give you a sense of just how intense this could get, meteorologists look at the temperature of the air high above the surface, at a level called 850 millibars, roughly a mile up, because it's a great gauge of how much heat is loaded into the atmosphere before local effects. And the forecasts have been pointing to values in the range of 24 to 28 degrees Celsius at that level across parts of Europe. For those who follow this closely, that is exceptionally high, the kind of reading that typically accompanies only the most intense heat waves. Some of the high-resolution model guidance has even flagged upper air thermal anomalies pushing toward the 99th percentile, which is forecaster language for about as hot as it essentially ever gets for the region and time of year. Now, I want to be measured here. These are model projections, and the exact surface temperatures depend on many local factors. But when the models light up with numbers like these, it tells you the raw ingredients for a truly severe heat wave are on the table. This isn't a run-of-the-mill warm spell. It's the atmosphere loading up for something potentially historic in the hardest hit zones. But here's the most important part of this forecast, the specific what's coming that makes this change so notable. The focus of the heat is shifting. Earlier heat waves this summer hammered Western Europe especially hard. Places like Spain, Portugal, France, and the UK bore the brunt. But this time, the models suggest the core of the most intense heat is expanding and shifting eastward, targeting Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe, along with the Mediterranean. The strongest, most confident heat signal is now centered over the Mediterranean and Southeastern Europe. We're talking about the familiar summer heat clusters, the Iberian Peninsula, Italy, Greece, and the Balkans, as well as an eastward push toward the western Black Sea region. So if you're in southern or southeastern Europe or the Mediterranean, this forecast is aimed squarely at you. The heat that scorched the west is now setting its sights on the south and east. And the models give us a sense of the timeline of how this unfolds week by week. In the near term, through the first part of August, the heat is forecast to build and intensify across Central and Southern Europe, subtracting even more moisture from the already parched ground and expanding the drought. Then, looking further ahead into the second and third weeks of August, the guidance shows that heat wave progressively expanding and shifting eastward, extending its reach toward Eastern Europe and that western Black Sea region, while the hot pattern broadly maintains its grip through the middle of the month. So this isn't a one-day spike. It's a prolonged, evolving heat event that migrates across the continent over a couple of weeks, which is part of what makes it so significant. A long-duration heat wave is far more dangerous than a brief hot day because the heat stress on people, on the power grid, on the water supply, and on the land accumulates the longer it persists. Of course, the further out we look, the more uncertain the details become and the exact timing and intensity could shift as we get closer. But the consistent theme across the forecast guidance is heat that lingers and spreads eastward rather than a quick spike that passes. Let's break down what that means region by region, because the Mediterranean and southeast covers a lot of ground. Across the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, which has already endured a scorching summer, the heat is expected to remain a persistent threat, keeping temperatures well above normal and the wildfire danger elevated. In Italy, from the south up through the central regions, the heat dome could push temperatures into the dangerous range, affecting major cities and the packed coastal resorts alike. Greece, which has battled severe wildfires in recent summers, faces both intense heat and the accompanying fire risk across the mainland and the islands. And the Balkans, countries like Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Romania, sit right in the crosshairs of this eastward shifting heat, a region that has repeatedly seen some of the most extreme temperatures in Europe during recent heat waves. Pushing further east, the forecasts even show the heat extending toward the western Black Sea region. So this is a broad, continent-spanning heat event on the southern and eastern flank of Europe, touching a huge number of countries and an enormous population. If your summer plans involve any of these areas, this is the forecast you need to be watching closely in the days ahead. And the timing could hardly be more significant, because these are exactly the regions packed with tens of millions of residents and holidaymakers at the absolute peak of the summer vacation season. The Mediterranean coasts, the Greek islands, the Italian beaches, the Balkans, all of it teeming with people right as this heat dome builds. That combination of extreme heat and enormous crowds of people, many of them tourists who may not be acclimatized to this kind of heat or aware of the local dangers, is exactly what makes forecasters so attentive. A major heat wave hitting a packed Mediterranean in August is a serious public health concern. Now, here's the other half of this big change, and it's a fascinating contrast. While the south bakes, the picture in the north looks quite different. A sharp gradient, a dividing line, is expected to develop across the continent. As that heat dome builds over the south and east, a different pattern is setting up over the north and northwest. Forecasters are watching a shift in the large-scale atmospheric setup that favors more high pressure to the northwest of the UK. which paradoxically can bring cooler, fresher, and at times showery or unsettled conditions to the UK and parts of Northern Europe, with temperatures closer to average or even below. So you could have a genuinely dramatic split, dangerous, record-challenging heat across the Mediterranean and southeast, while Northern Europe and the UK see comparatively cool, changeable, Atlantic-influenced weather. Two completely different summers playing out on the same continent at the same time. That north-south contrast is one of the defining features of this pattern change, and it's why a blanket statement like Europe is heating up doesn't quite capture it. The reality is a divided continent. For those in the north, the UK, Ireland, and parts of northern and northwestern Europe, this means the pattern could feel a lot like a more typical, changeable Atlantic summer, at least compared to the extremes further south. After what has, for some northern areas, already been an unusually dry and warm stretch this year, the developing setup favors fresher air pushing in off the Atlantic, bringing more clouds, breezes, and spells of rain, with temperatures around or even below the seasonal average. Now, for many people in the north, that's genuinely welcome. A break from heat and some much-needed rain for gardens and reservoirs. But it's worth noting that this kind of unsettled pattern can also bring its own hazards. Periods of heavy rain, gusty winds, and the occasional thundery breakdown. And the dividing line between the hot south and the cooler north isn't fixed. It can wobble north and south over time, so areas near that boundary could swing between warm, settled spells and cooler, wetter ones as the pattern evolves. This is exactly why, if you're anywhere in that transition zone across Central Europe, it's especially worth watching your local forecast closely, because your weather could change significantly depending on which side of that boundary you end up on from one day to the next. And this brings us to one of the most important and potentially dangerous aspects of the whole setup: what happens along the boundary where these two contrasting air masses meet. Whenever you have a mass of extremely hot air bumping up against cooler, fresher air, that clash zone becomes a breeding ground for severe thunderstorms. The temperature contrast and the atmospheric instability can fuel powerful storms, bringing torrential downpours, large hail, damaging winds, and frequent lightning. So even as the south roasts, the regions caught between the heat and the cooler air could face volatile, stormy weather. And here's where that accumulated drought I mentioned earlier becomes so important. When heavy thunderstorm rain falls on ground that's been baked hard and dry for weeks, the soil can't absorb it quickly. Instead of soaking in, the water runs straight off the sun-hardened surface, which dramatically raises the risk of sudden, dangerous flash flooding. It's a cruel irony. After weeks of desperately needed rain being absent, when it finally comes, it can arrive so violently and on such hardened ground that it causes floods rather than relief. So the storm threat is very real, and it's amplified by the very drought the heat has created. We've seen this pattern play out repeatedly in recent European summers. A long, dry, hot spell broken not by gentle, soaking rain, but by violent, flooding thunderstorms. The worst of both worlds. There's another cruel twist worth understanding about the drought. You might think, at least a thunderstorm brings some rain to help with the drought and the wildfire risk. But forecasters caution that short-lived scattered thunderstorms are unlikely to meaningfully reverse the deep water deficit that has built up over this long, dry summer. A brief downpour here and there doesn't undo weeks of drought. The ground and the river systems need sustained, widespread rain to recover, which isn't in this forecast. So the drought is likely to persist even with some storms around, which means the elevated wildfire danger persists too. In fact, the returning heat will only further dry out the landscape, keeping the fire risk high across the southern and central parts of the continent. It's a self-reinforcing situation. The heat deepens the drought keeps the fire danger elevated, and the occasional storm brings flood risk without fixing the underlying dryness. So let's pull this all together into a clear picture of what's coming for Europe. After a brief, teasing cool down, a major new heat dome is building, the fourth heat wave of a brutal summer, and it's shifting its focus eastward and southward, taking aim at the Mediterranean, southeastern Europe, and the Balkans, where temperatures could soar past 40 degrees Celsius right at the peak of tourist season. Meanwhile, a sharp split leaves Northern Europe and the UK on the cooler, fresher, more unsettled side of things. Along the boundary between the two, severe thunderstorms and flash flooding become a real threat, made worse by drought-hardened ground. And through it all, the drought and wildfire danger across the south persist, unrelieved by the scattered storms. That is a genuinely big and complex change in Europe's weather. Not a simple heat wave, but a whole reconfiguration of the continent's summer pattern. So what should you do with this information, depending on where you are? Let me give you the practical guidance, because that's what turns a forecast into safety. If you're in the heat zone, the Mediterranean, the south, the southeast, the Balkans, treat this incoming heat wave with real respect, especially if you're on holiday and not used to it. Stay hydrated, drink water regularly throughout the day, and don't wait until you're thirsty. Schedule any strenuous activity. sightseeing, hiking, sports for the early morning or the evening, and avoid the brutal midday and afternoon sun. Seek out air conditioning or cool, shaded spaces during the peak heat. And keep a close eye on the most vulnerable: elderly travelers and residents, young children, and anyone with heart or respiratory conditions. Know the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and don't push through them. If you're in a region that could see those severe storms, take that seriously too. Before a storm hits, secure loose objects on balconies, terraces, and in gardens, because strong winds can turn them into projectiles. When a thunderstorm arrives, get indoors and avoid sheltering under isolated trees. Stay out of open water, and never enter a low-lying area or drive into a flooded roadway, since flash floods can rise with terrifying speed. And if you're in an area of high fire danger, be extremely cautious. Avoid anything that could spark a wildfire near dry vegetation, because in these conditions, a single spark from machinery, a discarded cigarette, or garden burning can ignite a fast-moving blaze. And wherever you are, the single best thing you can do is stay tuned to your own local forecast and any official weather warnings because, and this is crucial, these big seasonal and continental patterns describe the broad picture, but the specific details of exactly where the heat peaks or where a thunderstorm strikes can vary from town to town, even a few kilometers making a difference. So use this video to understand the big picture and the overall trend, but rely on your local meteorological service for the precise up-to-the-hour details that affect you directly. Here's the honest bottom line. Europe's weather is indeed about to change in a big way, but it's a nuanced change, not a simple one. The brief cool down is giving way to a powerful new heat dome, the fourth heat wave of the summer, shifting eastward to bake the Mediterranean, the south, and the southeast, potentially with record-challenging heat, right at the height of vacation season. Northern Europe and the UK, meanwhile, land on the cooler, stormier side of a sharply divided continent. Severe thunderstorms and flash flooding threaten the boundary zones, made more dangerous by the hard, drought-stricken ground, while the underlying drought and wildfire risk grind on. It's a forecast with real uncertainty in the details, but a strong and consistent signal in the big picture. So respect the heat, respect the storms, stay informed through your local sources, and take care of yourself and the vulnerable people around you. This summer isn't done with Europe yet. I'm going to be tracking this whole pattern change every step of the way. The heat domes build and its eastward shift, the storm threats, the fire danger, and when real relief might finally arrive. If you want to follow it with me and stay ahead of Europe's wild weather, subscribe right now so you don't miss an update. Because with a pattern this dynamic, staying informed genuinely matters. Hit that like button to help this reach more people across the continent who need to know what's coming. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and are you on the hot side or the stormy side of this split? Tell me. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next update. Stay cool, stay safe, watch those storms, and look out for one another out there.